I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
If one absolutely has to go through this, let's do it.
Thanks. At present, no more laughing. I am the representative of judicial authority on this island, and I have a murder on my hands. This document seems to incriminate Noland. I'm wondering if you know something that is liable to contradict it?
I don't know anything about this business, and I wonder if it's not yet another of my grandfather's dirty tricks. You know, Mr. Norm, he was really of a sort. He loved destroying people. Maybe he wanted to destroy Noland for pleasure. Maybe Noland knew too many things that could have compromised him, and my grandfather wanted to get rid of his attorney.
This transfer of shares fully reimburses Walter Jones for the embezzlement of funds by Hubert de Noland, doesn't it?
He succeeded in beating Hubert de Noland at his own game. That's all. My grandfather was very smart, you have to admit.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
It's a nightmare. My grandfather killed by a bullet, but I don't understand. It's not possible.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I was at the restaurant between 9:45 p.m. and 11 p.m. First, I cleared the table with Billy and Clara. Since there was no more staff, we were obviously obliged to cope by ourselves, weren't we? After this, I watched a bit of television with Martin. Billy was bored stiff and suggested we play poker. Outside of poker, you know, I don't think anything else exists for my brother. Clara had a row with him, as usual, and the mood deteriorated. On top of that, poker bores me. So, Martin, Christina, and Billy began a hand, and I went up to Lorenzo's studio. Up there, the view is spectacular. I wanted to watch the storm which had started to lash the island. I always loved storms. I was alone. Lorenzo was not there. I helped myself to a drink. But let me point out to you right away, Inspector, I could not see the coastal path. Lorenzo's studio does not overlook that part of the island at all. After a while, Lorenzo was still not back, and I'd had enough. Don't misunderstand me, Mr. Norm. I wanted to chat with him. There's no ambiguity in our relationship. He's an eccentric fellow and a little cuckoo, and I wanted a change of air. I came back down to the restaurant, and I found Billy, Martin, and Christina still in the thick of it. And the sight was intolerable. Billy almost ruined his life with poker, and it's very painful for me to watch him play like an addict. Christina had left to go to bed. Martin wanted to read a manuscript for his publishing house, and he went back to our room. The storm had excited me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I stayed on with Billy and Clara. We talked. At one moment, I remember we stopped because it was thundering so loudly. It was really impressive. You could see the landscape across the panoramic window like in broad daylight. And I started to worry about our grandfather. After all, he was an old man, and it bothered me to know that he was outside in weather like that. I asked myself what he was up to. Finally, I told Billy that we had to go and check things out. He asked me to first give him one last whiskey. My brother was also an alcoholic, Mr. Norm, you'll realize soon enough. So I poured him a glass, and I served myself a glass of wine to keep him company. We talked about this and that till 11:30 p.m. We'd almost forgotten about Grandfather.
With regard to Walter Jones, everyone plays the victim. But some people didn't refrain from trying to make him fall from his perch.
I'm not the one who started this procedure, Inspector. It is Hubert de Noland who suggested this to Billy and me. I acknowledge that I supported and signed this procedure, but please understand me. Noland saw my grandfather often, which was not the case with me. I thought he was telling the truth about my grandfather turning senile.
Well, if you had thought you would inherit, it seems to me that this is in a little danger.
I didn't have any illusions about my grandfather for a long time, Mr. Norm. And this repugnant letter only reinforces my convictions. Walter Jones is good and proper, one of the biggest jerks I know.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
Listen, Mr. Norm, I don't want to tell you tales. It was a give and take between us. My grandfather was rewriting his will in our favor, something which is utterly normal and which happens in every family in the world, I'll allow myself to remind you. in exchange for which Billy and I accepted to sign this paper. My grandfather manipulated us one more time. He took us for a big ride. In my view, we'll get nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Why did Jones speak of your desire for revenge against him?
Mr. Norm, I will never forget, you hear me, never, that day. The day when I was able to restore some dignity to my father, who was humiliated by this jerk Walter Jones. And if I'd had a shorter temper, I would have killed my grandfather that day. It was everything he deserved. Yes, I would have so liked to kill Walter Jones.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
I wouldn't stake my life on it, but this chain looks very much like the one my grandfather had.
This family photo is very touching. I imagine that you learned to shoot because you have a gun in your hands?
My God, you're bringing back memories, Inspector. I had forgotten this. It was nevertheless marvelous. My grandfather took us to a hunting reserve in Tanzania. There, Walter Jones was like a child. Yes, it's one of the best memories I will keep of him. His childlike laughter during the safari.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
Yes, I remember that my grandfather wore a small chain. I am certain, Mr. Norm.
Do you know who in this tower knows how to use a gun?
I saw Lorenzo Battiglieri use a rifle on gulls. It was a long time ago, but I don't think he has lost his dexterity, even if he is loaded with antidepressants.
Did you see anyone in the library the evening of the murder?
Why this question, Mr. Norm, since you already know? I was not in the library before or during the murder of my grandfather.
I get it. The ocean has covered the whole island. I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
Good. Well done, man. What do you want me to say?
Thanks. At present, no more laughing. I am the representative of judicial authority on this island, and I have a murder on my hands. This document seems to incriminate Noland. I'm wondering if you know something that is liable to contradict it?
I never liked this Nolan fellow, but now it's for a good reason. It seems pretty damning, Inspector.
This transfer of shares fully reimburses Walter Jones for the embezzlement of funds by Hubert de Noland, doesn't it?
Wow, Norm. If you ask me, with this, Mr. Hubert de Noland seems pretty much in hot water.
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
What are you saying? They shot the old man? Wow, we're swimming in a real crime novel now, Norm. And I bet you're going to conduct an investigation and unmask the guilty party, right?
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I played poker with Martin and Christina between 9:45 p.m. and 11:15 p.m. And of course, I had a row with my wife, who made a scene because of it. She hates the game. I asked myself how I can still tolerate her. Sonia and Martin, they fought over something petty. I can't remember what it was. In any case, Sonia was really tense. She left to calm down a little. And it was her, I stress it was her, who came back for our grandfather. She was beside herself with worry that he should be out in such horrible weather. We discussed it and said that we better check out where the old guy was. It was 11:30 p.m., and it was then that Nolan burst into the room telling us that our grandfather was dead.
With regard to Walter Jones, everyone plays the victim. But some people didn't refrain from trying to make him fall from his perch.
Oh, you know I didn't take part in this thing wholeheartedly. Sonia and Martin had their reasons, and I had mine.
Well, if you had thought you would inherit, it seems to me that this is in a little danger.
Helping for grandfather's estate is like betting on a bad hand. One has little chance of winning. I'm a gambler. I counted on it anyway. I shouldn't have.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
Well, it was our only chance to recoup our grandfather's estate. Well, as I said, my grandfather brought Sonia and me together in his office to sign this paper. He made an impossibly huge fuss about how he had fired all his staff and how it was a call for help. He wanted us to take care of him and pamper him. Us, his cherished grandchildren. See what kind of guy he is? We asked to see his will, but what do you think? What play acting when I think back. He was a big bluffer, the old man. He wouldn't have been bad at poker.
Well, Billy, I had this impression that you shook a stick at a beehive, and that you dragged your family into this murky business.
Well, it's true, I confess. I made a real mess of things. And then after all, it doesn't surprise me that my miserly grandfather hated me to the end. Nevertheless, I trusted him. I thought he was going to help me out, or that his estate would help me later. And then the old jerk didn't lift his little finger when Grigory Pavliev, the insane mafia don, contracted someone to deliver my head. You're from the police. You have to get me out of this situation, Norm. Otherwise, I'm a dead man.
Walter Jones was not fond of Clara.
I dragged a lot of people I love into hot water. Gambling, drugs, all that. I know. My grandfather was pitiless towards me. He never gave a single cent to save me from misery. But still, he could have spared my wife and my father-in-law. But that's the way it is. I'm a good-for-nothing, and Walter Jones was the worst of sharks.
I didn't think Jones was such a jerk, and his accomplice Nolan doesn't seem to be much better.
Inspector, I know that my father-in-law has some major health issue, and that it's all my fault. My wife is angry at me. It's to be expected. But Walter Jones could have arranged everything just by lifting his little finger. He preferred to take advantage of the situation by preying on my father-in-law's business. He's the king of jerks, and his acolyte is more or less the same, Norm.
Why did Walter Jones talk about Sonia's desire for revenge?
The truth is that Sonia is the bravest of us all. She really has courage, if you see what I'm trying to say. The grandfather always knew this. He was afraid of her and respected her. Sonia didn't fall for it. She was the only one who fought back. You understand?
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
Well done, Inspector. That's the chain.
This family photo is very touching. I imagine that you learned to shoot because you have a gun in your hands?
Oh yeah, I remember. Sometimes it was really fun. I was a kid, and the lions and the elephants and all that, it suited me fine. But hunting? No. Really not my thing. You had to walk for hours and hours to finally come face to face with a beast that wanted nothing to do with you. My grandfather took me for a moron because I was no good at it.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
I didn't pay a lot of attention, but I remember that my grandfather always wore a small chain. Ever since he built this tower, I always saw him wearing a chain. Of that, I'm sure.
Do you know who in this tower knows how to use a gun?
On that point, Inspector, I haven't got the foggiest.
Did you see anyone in the library the evening of the murder?
Listen, I already told you everything about this. In the end, Inspector, your questions are exhausting.
I understand. I need a key.
Who is a good shot? Lorenzo, Marco, Noland, Billy, and Sonia are good shots.
Lorenzo and Noland are very good shots. As for the grandchildren, it's Grandpa Jones who educated them. A special mention for Marco, who even distinguished himself in the army thanks to his talents as a shot. Billy's the only one who couldn't be trigger happy. Anyway, that's what he says. It gives us a good handful of suspects at any rate.
I'm delighted to see that things are moving well, Jack. Choose among your three suspects. You'll find the skillful gunslinger who used the weapon of the crime the evening that Walter Jones was sent to the kingdom of the dead.
It's the time for soup. I have a real internal clock for these sort of things.